The meeting between the US and Chinese defense ministers this week in Malaysia may look diplomatic on the surface, but in reality, it marks one of the most critical turning points in the balance of power across the Indo-Pacific. Behind the polite handshakes and press smiles, both sides came prepared for confrontation, not cooperation. The United States, represented by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, emphasized that Washington will defend its interests vigorously in the region. Meanwhile, Beijing's delegate reiterated that China considers the South China Sea and Taiwan non-negotiable parts of its core sovereignty. This is not just another political statement, it is a direct signal that the next decade could see the Indo-Pacific becoming the world's most militarized zone. Over the past 2 years, the United States has been reshaping its alliances in Asia. A new 10-year defense partnership was signed with India, expanding joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and naval cooperation. Japan and Australia, both U.S. allies, have increased defense spending to historic levels, while the Philippines is allowing new American bases closer to the Taiwan Strait. To China, this looks like encirclement. To Washington, it's deterrence. But beyond the military maneuvers, an economic war is already underway. The U.S. has restricted Chinese access to advanced semiconductor technologies, while Beijing is cutting exports of rare earth minerals, crucial for Western defense industries. This tit-for-tat dynamic is not just about trade. It's about technological dominance, supply chain control, and who shapes the world's next generation of power systems. India's growing role is another major shift. For decades, India balanced carefully between Moscow and Washington. But now, New Delhi sees an opportunity to position itself as a third pole of power. With American backing, India's naval expansion in the Indian Ocean directly challenges China's belt and road influence in South Asia and East Africa. Beijing knows that if India aligns fully with the West, China's maritime ambitions could be trapped between U.S. fleets in the Pacific and Indian fleets in the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, the Chinese People's Liberation Army is modernizing faster than ever. Beijing launched its third aircraft carrier, tested hypersonic weapons, and built military outposts across disputed islands in the South China Sea. At the same time, China is deepening security ties with Russia, coordinating joint bomber patrols near Japan and the Korean Peninsula. Together, they're signaling that if Washington builds alliances, Beijing and Moscow will build counter-alliances. But there's another layer: domestic politics. In the U.S., the upcoming elections are intensifying anti-China rhetoric. Politicians compete over who can appear tougher on Beijing. In China, the Communist Party is facing economic slowdown, youth unemployment, and social tension. When domestic challenges rise, both sides often turn to foreign policy to rally national unity. That's what makes this moment so dangerous. Internal weakness can fuel external confrontation. Regional players are preparing for turbulence. Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia are quietly increasing military budgets and diversifying arms suppliers. Japan recently approved its largest post-war defense budget, focusing on missile defense systems aimed squarely at China and North Korea. Even South Korea, historically cautious, is reconsidering nuclear deterrence under growing regional pressure. As the US and China move from competition to open strategic rivalry, the world is witnessing the rebirth of blocs, not unlike the Cold War, but with global supply chains and AI technologies intertwined. Unlike the Soviet era, this conflict won't be purely ideological. It's a hybrid confrontation blending economy, technology, cyber, and information warfare. If tensions continue to rise, the next flashpoints could emerge around Taiwan, the South China Sea, or even disputed Himalayan borders between China and India. A single miscalculation, a drone, a naval collision, or an air interception gone wrong could ignite a regional crisis. And in today's interconnected world, that crisis would send economic shockwaves far beyond Asia. For now, both Washington and Beijing insist they don't seek war. But history reminds us, major wars rarely start by intention. They start by escalation, misperception, and the illusion of control. The Indo-Pacific is not just a regional story anymore. It's the center of gravity for 21st century power. Whoever dominates here will likely define the next world order. So when the US and Chinese defense ministers met in Malaysia this week, they weren't just shaking hands. They were measuring each other's resolve and quietly preparing for the next phase of a global rivalry that is only beginning.